Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university.
Hello, you are listening to the State of Wellbeing podcast, a podcast sponsored by South Dakota State University, helping us talk through all kinds of topics around well-being. I am your host for this episode, Toby Uecker. I am SDSU's Dean of Students and happy to be spending some time here talking through an important topic about well-being related to the seasonality that we're coming into right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about well-being generally, but also about seasonal affective disorder. And my guest for this episode is Dr. Amy Newstrom from South Dakota State here in Rapid City. So we're actually in her Rapid City office having some conversations and looking forward to sharing this with our SDSU community across the state. So welcome to the podcast, Amy. Why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little bit about your background and work experience and get us started with knowing a little bit about you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My journey started in getting a undergraduate degree in human biology from the University of Montana, and then I've been a South Dakota State University person ever since then. So I have a bachelor's degree in nursing, I have a master's degree in nursing, family nurse practitioner, a master's degree in counseling, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, post-grad certificate, a doctorate of nursing practice, and I'm working on my PhD right now. So that is kind of the educational background. I started my nursing career 22 years ago at Avera McKinnon, so East River. I loved it there. I worked on the cardiopulmonary neuroacute unit and kind of got my feet underneath me. Then I moved home to the Black Hills and worked in the emergency department. And then I really kind of continued my passion for adult acute care, working in the hospital, but that kind of slowly transitioned into an interest in mental health. And so I had finished up my work on my master's of counseling degree and started working in mental health care exclusively about 12 years ago. So I've worked in different settings, including inpatient, outpatient, the jail here in Rapid City, Pennington County Jail. I've worked with transcranial magnetic stimulation, ketamine treatments. Mostly now I do medication management and therapy for a variety of clients aging from usually above 10 is what I prefer, up until whenever. 90, even 100 is great. So that's kind of what I do now. And then I teach for the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner program at the Graduate College of Nursing. So
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a lot of wide-ranging experience you're going to bring to our conversation. Maybe somebody will hear something in that background and say, you should do a podcast on this next, and we'll come back out and talk to you. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for bringing that expertise in. And I'll maybe start a little bit generally, knowing that you have such a sort of wide range of client work and sort of background. So I'd love for you to just tell us a few general guidelines that you like to provide students or clients when it comes to being self-aware about mental health, and especially about identifying changes they might identify in that mental health along.
So there's a lot of different ways to think about this, and I think each person has to find a voice that they really connect with. But some of the things that I talk about are taking the stance of being a curious observer in your own life, and I like that stance because when we are examining things with judgment, we're missing things. So the woulda, coulda, shoulda type talk about ourselves really puts us at a disadvantage to noticing where we're at and what's happening with us and if there are any changes. So we want to notice the patterns about when we're well and when we're not well, without any judgment. So when we put judgment in it, we're thinking, I shouldn't feel this way, or I should be doing this. But we're missing out on the observation part of it of, well, what is this? And how do I notice it? And what does it mean to me? Have I ever experienced it in the past? And if I have, what did I do to change it? right? Each person is wise in their own ability to recognize their patterns and know what suits them best. And so we have to rely and tap into that wisdom for each individual to be able to understand themselves, and then also to select a path that actually works. So whatever works for me may not work for you. And so it's super important that each person does their own examination to be able to identify what's going on. So I think the other part is awareness of mood and emotion. That's actually a lot more difficult than we think. So especially in people that have grown up in trauma as children. And so there's a really quick inventory that someone can take online called the Adverse Childhood Events. You can just Google that. It's about 17 items. And what you're looking for is how high is that score. So a score over 4 indicates that this could have impacted you, essentially. It's not that those impacts can't change over time. They can. We can moderate those effects, but they do impact you. So one of those things is when kids are growing up in chaos or witnessing abuse or enduring abuse themselves, they kind of lose sense of what they actually feel. And that's kind of important to their survival, because if I walk into a home and I'm hungry and I want a sandwich, but I'm met with anger or violence, my wanting a sandwich becomes detrimental to my survival. So it's better for me to be able to ignore my own hunger than to express it. And that becomes a pattern over time, so that when people are distressed, when they're sad or upset or frustrated, then it's really hard to identify that emotion because it hasn't been important and in fact could even cause them pain or suffering in the past. And so just even noticing and being able to name our emotions is a really great skill that all of us kind of need to work on, actually, right? So there's online, again, there's these beautiful emotion wheels that people can download and print, or you can get stickers on Amazon or whatever, but they help us to identify what we're feeling, not just these really blanket ideas of I'm good or everything's great or, oh, it's a bad day, but really saying, what does that mean? Because it's really hard if we can't, kind of a quote is, if we can't name it, we can't tame it. So when we're thinking about changes in mental health, if we haven't even begun to explore what the landscape is of how we feel, how can we notice a pattern?
Yeah. And I think there's something really empowering in both of those pieces that you said, of being able to name it, to sort of have some understanding of it, but also to do so without judgment and from a place that identifies it can change. Because I think I see that be something that can be very disempowering around mental health, is to have that judgment or that feeling of sort of predestination of what a particular emotion means. But to be able to identify it, name it, not judge it, but work on where you might want to be, is a way to think of it that I think is a little bit more empowering for someone who might be challenged by what they find or what they define.
Absolutely.
Great. So thinking again generally, tell us about any maybe trends or general ideas that you've seen in mental health and well-being and the way we talk about it or work through it over the years. Anything you would highlight as something that might help further inform how people think about well-being?
Well, hopefully we're moving towards making this a regular conversation. And obviously doing a podcast and seeing all of the things that are out there, I think we are moving in that direction. I think it's useful to have the conversations and start to think about how can we become healthier. Right now, the statistics from World Health Organization and National Institute of Mental Health kind of indicate we're not quite there yet. They estimate that about 1 in 4 or 5 of us are dealing with mental illness. Women are more than twice as likely to develop depression than men, and men are definitely more likely to complete suicide. And so these are all things that we have to consider about where we're at right now and identify that there's still work to be done. In the state of South Dakota, the national rates of suicide are about 4.7 per 100,000 people. In South Dakota, we're at about 21.4 per 100,000 people. And in some of our counties, people are really struggling. So Todd County consistently over years has a much higher rate. Right now, they're at 61.3 suicides per 100,000 people. So that's 4 times the national average. So when we look at national trends and then we look at our state trends, we definitely have some work to do. We know Johns Hopkins just did a study about how mental illness is affecting us post-COVID. And so there is still a great effect going on. We also know that people struggling with finances and position in life are more likely to suffer with mental illness. And so that's really a point of intersectionality, if you will, where they're suffering, on 2 fronts. And so we have a lot of work to do in all of those areas because they're so intertwined. We not only need to address and, accept that mental health is a thing, but now we also need to think about all the resources and all of the influencing factors and how we can begin to address all of that as well.
And I think those factors that you identify are things that we hear about in our daily world right now, right? And so to think about the ways that the narratives around food insecurity or around economic challenges overlap with that mental health conversation, I think is sure part of the importance of now for having some of these conversations.
Absolutely. And if you think about students are really going through it when you think about food security and financial burden. And they're at a point where they're really trying to better their lives, but it's a struggle. It's a struggle for them to work and go to school, especially in the current climate.
Yeah. So climate, maybe without intending to, is I think a little bit of a segue into, I think, the main topic that we had planned to spend some time on today, and that's around seasonal affective disorder. And so seasonal affective disorder, SAD, SAD, I think different people hear it as different things. So tell us a little bit about that idea for someone, especially who's maybe not especially familiar with that concept, and are there any common misconceptions about what SAD is before we kind of get into the deeper conversation about it?
Well, there's one misconception that seasonal affective disorder is winter blues. It's not winter blues. It's more than that, right? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness talks about this being a major depressive disorder with a seasonal pattern is really what the term for it is, or the name for it is. So those are some misconceptions, that it's some milder form or something like that. It's not. It's depression. But it has this pattern that we can associate with changes in the seasons. The key component, of course, to any DSM diagnosis is that the symptoms are distressing and they cause some sort of dysfunction. And so we know that seasonal affective disorder does both of those. It's about 5% of adults in the U.S. that experience it, and it typically lasts for about 40% of the year. So, yeah, kind of interesting, right? When you think about it, we would think, oh, well, there's 4 seasons. It would only be 25%, but it's impacting a significant part of the year for these clients. So
yeah, I think that's important to hear and remember. I think it's maybe worked its way into culture enough that we can sometimes treat it very sort of nonchalantly or use it as sort of the shorthand for some other just sort of lag that might exist in our life when it's a little dark outside during the winter. And I think to identify that can be a lived experience too, but it is not necessarily a lived experience that is specific to being seasonal affective disorder.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Great. So when we sort of prepped for the conversation, we talked a little bit about the idea of biological and social factors playing a role in mental well-being. And I think that's a part of the way that I've maybe come to understand seasonal affective disorder and its pattern related to seasonality. And so can you talk with us about how those biological and social factors intersect a little bit with that pattern of seasonal affective disorder?
Well, we know that seasonal affective disorder is also based on your location. So how far away from the equator are you? We're pretty far away, right? None of us are usually wearing leis or Bermuda shorts throughout the year. And so we're far away. Our daylight really gets pretty minimal, and so there are biological and social factors that influence this. One of those, the biological factors are vitamin D. These are precursors, essentially, what we call the monoamines, right? So when people think about what we're affecting with psychotropic medications or what makes us have mental illness, we look at the monoamines, which include serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And so those are made within us. There's a lot of things that influence how those are made. One of them is vitamin D. And so when you think about that, when you look at our vitamin D levels, remember that ranges of labs are what we quote unquote call normal, but they are not optimal. And so for every person, that's going to be a little bit different. But when we're getting to vitamin D levels less than 20, we're really deficient. And so these processes, of course, are affected. And so when vitamin D is synthesized through sunlight, we can take it as a supplement. But as that wanes, we're also impacting our mood. This also can influence zinc levels. Zinc is another precursor to dopamine. When the light gets less, our immune system gets less, we're sick more often. All of these things that come with winter months, those precursors go down as well. All of this, including stress kind of straddles both biological and social, right? And especially when we're talking about students and the population we're kind of speaking with is, their stress level throughout the semester is going up. And so they're, physiologically, they're more stressed. And socially, they're more stressed as well. And that's all influencing everything. So a wise person once told me, our bodies are really smart. They play by caveman rules. And caveman rules say, if you're going to die of famine, or something violent, you shouldn't reproduce a baby and you shouldn't metabolize, right? We need to hang on to fat, and we shouldn't have babies that we can't take care of. And so these are ultimately, when we're very stressed, translate into hormonal shifts that make both of those things possible, right? So we see a decrease in very high level stresses. We see shifts in actual sex hormone so that we can't reproduce. And then we also see, or make it more difficult. And then we also see the shift of we can't shed a pound no matter what we do because we're not meant to starve. We don't want to starve, right? I mean, and that's really smart. Our bodies are smart like that. But doesn't feel so smart when you're on the treadmill for 30 minutes a day and eating, granola and an apple, and then you feel like, why am I not shedding a pound? Well, this is why. Biologically, you're built for survival. Smart, super smart. In our society, feels like it's working against us. But it's a way of our bodies saying, hey, slow down. Check things out, especially for these students, right? The freshman 15, as they put it. Why is that? It's because it's very stressful to leave home. It's very stressful to have to establish patterns without any parental guidance. How do you set up your bedtime? How do you know when to go to the gym? When you're really stressed out about how to study or what's for dinner or how to wash your clothes. I mean, these things are very real. And so, of course, that body is going to interpret it as being in a stressful situation. And then we have all of these changes that happen. And this actually increases suffering, right? Because especially when we talk about mental health, depression is a liar. Depression changes your perception. Depression says things are hopeless, that things will never change. This is false, right? It's a mist that's created by your mental state that you can't see through.
And it almost feels like it has the effect of countering that knowledge of your body is very smart and is trying to tell you something. It's almost like it's reframing what it's trying to tell you to be sort of a spiral in a negative direction instead of an opportunity to stop, observe non-judgmentally, like we were talking about a minute ago, and start to make adjustments based on what you observe and what you see.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we buy into the liar of depression, essentially the lies that depression tells you, we spiral more deeply into it because all of a sudden our mood, which is a function of all these things, of stress and biology and genetics, is our fault. And when it's our fault, and we can't motivate because also having a lack of motivation is part of depression, having low energy, low motivation, trouble sleeping. These are all part of having depression. And so when we believe that we are the problem, but we're also experiencing these symptoms, we almost become paralyzed in how to make ourselves better.
And I think you've there maybe identified again the importance of acknowledging and recognizing when seasonal affective disorder is sort of serious in terms of its impact on what's going on. I think, again, like I maybe mentioned earlier, we maybe shorthand it as this thing that is sort of tweaked with some sort of small-scale change or gimmick, but it's a lot more sort of deep and intense than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can affect all aspects of your life, especially, actually melatonin and serotonin are metabolized on the same pathway, right? They're created in the same pathway. And so when we see some problem with mood, we actually see some problem with sleep. And that really turns into a snake eating its tail, where people aren't sleeping, they don't feel good, they don't sleep, they don't feel good, low energy, low motivation, changes in appetite. This can even progress to having suicidal thinking. And all of those things can impact functioning. The way that people are able to do their homework or show up to games or anything, all of a sudden, this seems overwhelming. And then that leads to social isolation.
So, we talked a lot about the spiral that direction. I'd be interested to maybe frame the next question sort of as maybe there's a listener that's got this podcast and says, oh, I feel like there are pieces of what Dr. Amy's describing that resonate for me. I maybe wonder if this is something I'm navigating. What recommendations, what information would you share about ways to maybe work to interrupt that spiral that we talked about as being really concerning? How would we maybe work to interrupt that?
Well, that's a really complicated question, isn't it? And I wish that I could just say, do this or that. And I think there's so many canned answers that really kind of shut people down and make them feel isolated again. When people say, just get out and exercise, people that are suffering from seasonal affective disorder or major depression, they're struggling to motivate. They have no energy. And so trying to suggest something that requires key ingredients that they don't have kind of deepens the narrative that change is difficult or impossible. So I think that the thing to say is, again, looping back to that becoming this like compassionate, non-judgmental observer of yourself, is the first thing is do anything. Don't do nothing. But you have to decide what that is for you that makes sense and that you can follow through and do. One thing often that people do is that they shut down and they shut away and they isolate. And that is also part of depression, is when we really get self-critical. When people are running through conversations in their head and looking for the mistakes and thinking that people found them unpleasant, this is part of depression. And it's really, again, it's that lying part of depression that says, hey, don't go out, sit at home in the dark, in your bed, which is totally counterintuitive to getting better, right? But it's hard to overcome that because it really is such a believable lie. And because you're altered, because this mood state is really masking a path, So I think that and that all sounds, kind of ambiguous. So what do I do? First, talk to somebody. Talk to anybody. You can text 988, you can call 988, you can go to a local community center and talk to like a crisis care center. You can go to an emergency department. You can go to the school because there's the student health center. You can find a counselor on your own. You can talk to your primary care provider. You can find a psychiatric provider. You can talk to someone on campus that you feel comfortable and just let them know you're suffering. Suffering is not something, it's not disgraceful or anything. It's okay. It's part of being human. But we don't solve it by being alone.
Yeah. And I think I hear you saying lots of really good resources that might be what we think of as professionals, But I think what I also hear you saying in that idea of do anything that gets you farther down the path is it could be getting up the sort of nerve and information to talk to that trusted friend and ask them to maybe help on some of those next communication levels. Am I interpreting that a little bit correctly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it helps us to calibrate reality, right? So when we are in an altered mood state like depression, we know that we have perceptive differences, especially when it comes to hope. And so roping those people in that we know and we trust their judgment to say, hey, am I looking at this the right way? Or, hey, I'm experiencing this. What do you think? What have you noticed about me? I think it's really important, and it's also very hard to do. It's very hard to do. But the thing is, if you're listening to this and you hear these symptoms and you're identifying with this, you are worth it and things can change. I'm telling you that through the cloud of whatever you're feeling, you are worth it and you can change it. But you have to do one step. And I know that's hard, but reach out, because people will take your hand and they'll help you. You don't have to do it alone. You just have to do the one thing. And maybe that's something simple like drinking more water. Any of these things actually start a positive reinforcing pattern, right? So what we're saying to ourselves when we do even something simple like drinking more water is, I'm important. Taking care of me is important. I'm going to drink more water, or I'm going to have a normal bedtime, or I'm going to drink less alcohol, or I'm not going to eat 10 donuts today, whatever it is, right? And that cues your brain to say, hey, this is different. I don't need to punish myself. I don't need to stay in this rut. Something could change. And then when we change it, we identify, I can change it. I can do something. And this kind of reinforces going out and getting help. So I know that, again, that kind of is ambiguous, but what we want to do, we start out being the observer, and then we consider what we can do. We consider the past, right? Hopefully, in some way, you've left yourself a breadcrumb trail throughout life, right? And journaling is a great way to do that. Talking with friends is a great way to do that, right? A good friend or a mother, father, a caregiver, they're a living journal. They remember you. They know you. You can check in with them. They will reflect back where you've been and what they see, and this gives you information to go off of. And then make a plan, but make a plan that works. Don't say to yourself, I'm going to eat clean and I'm going to exercise 5 days a week and I'm going to drink more water and I'm going to go to bed at 8 o'clock, because you probably won't do all that at once. But pick one thing and do it.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the early part of our conversation where you talked about being that observer and working to be non-judgmental of your mental well-being state. You can set that up to be easier by setting those goals that are going to give you the opportunity to say, hey, I did something. I got to where I wanted to today. Rather than feeling like instead you're judging yourself for not getting where you wanted to. Set that goal you can get to and make that your celebration for that day and figure out what the next day is.
Absolutely. Authenticate it. When you make progress, authenticate it. No matter what it is. Like, hey, I had one more glass of water today. At the end of the day, say, I did good by doing that. I'm proud of myself for doing that. That's something, no matter what it was. No matter what it was, right? Because again, those mood states, they tell us differently. They tell us, oh, no, that doesn't really make a difference. But we have to battle that a little bit. We have to challenge that by saying, no, this is an observable fact. I did make it to the gym today. Doesn't mean I'll make it tomorrow. It doesn't mean it, but today I did it. Today I can be proud of myself. Today I took a step in the right direction, and maybe that'll motivate me to do the next thing. And sometimes when depression is really deep, the first step is, hitching yourself to somebody who knows the path. And that's a lot of times it's a care provider. Let somebody in that knows how to go down this path and knows what's happening, that can check your vitamin D level, that can check your zinc level, that could check your thyroid level to make sure that biologically nothing's going on, that maybe you could share that you're stressed out about finances or you don't want to go home for Thanksgiving. Those are counselors that you can talk to, and you check in to say what they can help you to identify what can change.
Absolutely. And so you've, I think, provided in a couple of different points in the podcast a good lists of resources and potential ideas of who those contact people might be. As we kind of wrap up our time together, I'd maybe give you an opportunity if there's a resource you think of that you haven't had a chance to mention yet, or if there are just any kind of closing thoughts you would have for folks as they think about sort of the seasonality that they might be navigating, or about how to be that authentic listener and encourager for themselves.
So there's a well-being guide that SDSU has available. It's online. A lot of times professors will put it in their course content. And so that's a really easy way to access some good resources. But on campus, there are a lot of people that want to help. It's absolutely tragic when someone succumbs to hopelessness. And it's also something that's completely preventable. And it is just through reaching out. It's just making contact, right? So we all have to do that. We have to be kind to ourselves, number one, right? No matter what you've done, you deserve kindness. And then we also have to be really kind to one another. And so when somebody does reach out, or we see somebody struggling, if you see somebody crying after class or after a finals, what does it really cost for you to stop and say, hey, are you okay? Right? And all of us, even as faculty or whatever position we're in at life, we can check in with people. We can just simply say, are you okay, from a human standpoint? And I think that means so much more than people think it does. That connection, we kind of lost a lot of that in COVID, when we were all just staring at each other's eyeballs and nobody could see what kind of, what facial expression we were making. We lost some of that. And I think we really have to work to reach out again and be connected. And that's such a great way to prevent some of these things and also to mitigate them.
Great. Well, thank you for helping us maybe start from a place of talking about a specific condition, a specific disorder, but I really think broadening our concept of how we can listen to our own bodies, our own identities of emotion and well-being, and use sort of that authentic evaluation to honor what we're experiencing and to help us find what's the step that we can manage from here. So thank you for kind of giving us some really big picture on top of some specific pieces that folks might find useful as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think our student population is amazing. These are young people that are motivated in the right place. They're trying to do good in the world, and they deserve to feel good and to get what they need to continue to do their amazing work. So.
And if you need something to hear, positivity right there. I think the end tagline from Dr. Amy Newstrom here in our Graduate School of Nursing in Rapid City. So thank you for joining us on the State of Wellbeing podcast. And we'll encourage folks to share other questions or topics they might want to hear about or to listen to other episodes as we go. Dr. Amy, thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.